All right, so good vibrations on a hot summer day, and I'm recording this with the door and window open, so if you hear some birds chirping and some lawnmowers going off, then it's all good. It's nice to have days like this. So today I'm going to be talking all about the concepts of free will, consent, and contracting. They are very wide-reaching. There's many different ways in which they play out. And my guest is the researcher known as Alan of Salisbury. We're getting into all of this. Alan, welcome, mate.
Welcome. Good morning.
Now, I heard you for the first time last year in an interview with Victoria on INM TV. And a lot of what you had to say chimed with me. And I thought, yeah, I'm with this guy on so many things. So I thought it'd be great to bring you on this show to talk about these overall subject areas. Maybe you just want to give a quick introduction of how you got into researching all this stuff and what it was about it that first piqued your interest.
Okay, well, firstly, thank you, Mark, for inviting me on the show. I've listened to a lot of your stuff as well, especially on the music industry as well, being a musician myself. But I got into this law thing, and I just got a real passion for it. I first was stimulated, I guess, in a way, by a guy called John Harris, who has a YouTube video called "It's an Illusion," which I think would be a good primer for a lot of people to get into. Because he explains a bit of what we call the word magic. But the whole consent thing is a really big subject in a way, and it's, as you said, it's really crucial how we're tricked into consent, or how we unwittingly give consent, or consent is manufactured. So, I guess to start off with, really, when you study law, you need to make the difference between law and legal. They're basically two entirely different things. Legal is all acts, statutes, instruments, and bylaw. They are not law. They are only given the force of law if you consent.
Okay, man's law, right? Man's law as opposed to spiritual law.
Yes, spiritual law or natural law. So it's some people would call that faux law, or a false form of law, but it's not law. It's only given law if you consent. Okay, so if you look at, say, policy men, or what we know as policemen, they're enforcing the policies of the Crown Corporation, which is the Roman Church, the Roman cult. And I'll just clear that up a bit. It's got nothing to do with anybody's spiritual beliefs or anything like that, but it's got to do with the ultimate authority from which all law and legislation is drawn from. There are basically three authorities. The first is drawn from, ideally, the supreme creator of all things, which is sometimes known as God, but I'll get back to that actual word itself, because it's a strange term, that one. And the second is the consent of the people. And of course, the third is bloody violence. That's how you enforce it. But that's where the authorities are supposed to come from. And it's drawn basically from threes. If you look in Roman law, which is basically what we're living under now, most of the world, it's been upgraded in 1933 to a thing called the Uniform Commercial Code, which was when the fiat money system was introduced, and birth registration kind of became compulsory, or we were tricked into it, or we consented to it. So, but basically, we're living under Roman law. Roman law is ruled by, or the sign of ultimate authority in Rome was a thing called a fascia, which was a bundle of rods to beat you with, and a beheading axe. So it had the power over life and death, and it was bound up together, i.e. in contracts or allegiances with other states, because that's how the Roman Empire worked. And to all intents and purposes, we're living under that law still now. It's the law of bonds and sureties, basically, Roman law. And, for example, again, I'll mention John Harris. I'll go, because I'll have to go through the meaning of words here. The first word is basically society. the thing about societies is they can legally have their own interpretation and meanings of words that are in common usage. And of course, the Law Society really exploit this to the fullest opportunity and the fullest extent. So you could be speaking in English and they're not listening in English, they're listening in the rules of their society, their interpretation of the words. So if I give you some examples of that, say, for example, and these are cases, say a woman has been raped, and one of the lawyers says to the woman, "Did you suffer rape, madam?" And she says, "Yes, I suffered rape." The judge then dismisses the case, because to suffer in the word magic, if you like, or the word interpretation of the Law Society means to consent. And it comes from the Bible, to suffer the children. So if you suffer anything, that means you're actually consenting. So you can see how easy it would be for someone to consent. If said, "Did you suffer rape, madam?" And she says, "Yes," right, case dismissed. And everybody's looking around there thinking, well, and there's that interpretation of magic, well, what happened there? The case has been dismissed. What's going on? In other words, they witnessed an effect.
Is their way of viewing things in that instance that it's not their fault if you're too profane and ignorant to understand what's really being said? You had the opportunity to know, to research it, and if you didn't, then it's your lookout. The onus is on you and not on them. Do you think that's the way they view it?
Oh, they view it with a lot more prejudice than that, believe you me. And that would skirt me into again, how consent is given. For example, democracy, the basis of democracy. I'll just give you some words, and it should hopefully fall into place. Most people, they start by judging the system because they're kind of ego-based, and they generally do that because the system's having a go at them. And they're going, well, what's going on? And they get a resentment. And, of course, they get locked down in that process, and they make a claim against the system. The real progress starts is when you flip that around, flip the polarity around, and you say to yourself, well, what does the system think of me? I know what I think of the system, but what does the system think of me? And does the system have a claim against me? And this is where it all falls into place, because the answer to that is yes, the system has a claim against you. All policy men will, and corporations, or core pirates, if you like, will act with what's called implied right of consent. In other words, they will assume you have given consent until you rebut that consent. So that's how they work. So that's one way how consent is.
So to not say no is to tacitly say yes as they see it.
Basically, silence is consent. It's a complete perversion of natural law, but silence is taken as consent.
Right, okay.
All right, so if they'll make a charge, you say nothing, you're guilty. That's basically it. That's what they do.
So by default, you agree unless you state otherwise.
Right, exactly. And the way they do this is your birth is registered. Okay, so let's look at the interpretation of what that word means legally. When you register something, you are giving away whatever it is you are registering to whoever you're registering it with. So that's really got to sink in, because that's quite big. So your car is registered. It's got a number on it. It's not yours. You don't own anything. Nobody owns anything. This is the whole point. It's owned by the DVLA. It's their property, and they can do what they like with it. That's why they can take it away or put clamps on it, because it's the same as if you register some software, you download it on your computer, and it's not going to work unless you register it. So you've bought something, and then you've got to give it away in order to get back the terms and conditions, or the license, which is the terms and conditions, to use it. The same way as when your birth is registered, you're giving that child away. Technically, you're abandoning the child. Right? So you abandon your child at birth when it's born, and it's given to the state. It becomes their property, and they give it a thing called a name. Name is like a tag or a brand. So when somebody says, if you've got a name and you give that name, you're basically saying, I am owned, which means I have to consent. I have no rights. So when somebody says, I need your name address, and date of birth. Those are the three things in Roman law that denoted a bonded slave, because name basically comes from a Roman term, which means no man. So if you're no man, then you don't have any rights. That means you default to being a slave. And a master is always responsible for his slaves. That's another law, because again, that's an old Roman law. That's the way they kind of worked things. So basically, your birth is registered, and you're registered in a ward. Okay, then this is, and in that ward there are surgeries. So if we fast forward a bit, you register to vote in a ward, and your MPs will have surgeries. And you know this term, asylum seeker? Mm-hmm. Well, the mother, she gave birth, she abandoned the child, declaring herself to be unable to look after that child, to be literally a mental health outpatient who can't look after herself, can't manage her affairs, and signed herself into a ward in an asylum, where she gave power of attorney to the people who ran that ward, which was the parish church. And that links us back to the Roman thing, the Roman law thing, and the Roman church thing. Later on, you register to vote, and you're registering as a mental health outpatient in a ward, and you go and see your MP. And of course, your MP, what do they have? Surgeries. And they represent you in the House of Commons. That doesn't mean to say they have any real rights, because they're commoners, because only barons, baron means free men, only those are made up in the House of Lords are actually free men. So they basically represent you. The easiest way to look at it is if you imagine the film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and you're in this asylum, and it's being run by your parish council, who has the same sort of persona as Nurse Ratched, and your MPs are the guys in the ward that say, "Can we go fishing?" And they go on the fishing ship. So then Nurse Ratched goes up to the guys that are really running things and say they want to go on a fishing trip. And the people who are running the asylum decide whether you're going to go on the fishing trip or not. That's democracy. And they perfect their claim. You see, they've got this claim against you that you are owned, you're a mental health outpatient, and that they've got jurisdiction over you. So when they say, "What's your name?" and you give the name, which of course is theft, because all names are Crown copyright. And when somebody says, "Can you give me a name?" you could respond, depending on the situation, you could say, "Well, you're asking me to commit a crime because name is Crown copyright, and you're asking me to give you something that isn't my property."
We can certainly get onto maritime law and stuff, and isn't it incredible that people think this world is sane? Absolutely amazing. But what provision is in place for those that have done the research and figured out the ways in which we're all deceived, and they don't consent to all these statutes and these man-made laws? So supposing you want to drive a car, but you don't consent to having to register it and it being owned by the DVLA or whatever. Supposing you don't consent to paying council tax. It seems there's no provision in place for you to live freely without getting caged, assaulted, or even killed. I mean, of course, we are free in creation, we're sovereign free beings, and all these statutes and all this other illusion is just bullshit, because even if you're thrown into a prison cell, you're still inherently free as a spirit soul. But they've constructed this fictional system whereby you're supposed to adhere to their statutes and stuff. So supposing you state that you don't consent to it, you want no part in it, it seems there's no provision for you to step outside of that and not be affected, because they'll just throw your ass in jail, right?
Yes, and you need to know what their claim is, and their claim goes back to 1303 and a papal bull called Unum Sanctum. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Right. Well, the Pope Boniface, I think he might have been the 8th, I can't remember exactly the details, there's a lot to remember, but he basically claimed to own the whole world and everything in it. In other words, he gave notice in Roman law. And nobody, until Luther, I think, actually challenged that claim, which was a long time past its sale date. They then created, over the years, other papal bulls to perfect their claim. And what they did is unum sanctum is a trust. It was the first trust ever created. And in trust law, which is a different form of law, you need three things. The first thing is the grantor. The second is the trustees. And the third aspect to it is the beneficiaries. Well, their claim is that God, is the ultimate grantor. The term God that everybody bandies around when you dig into the law interpretation of it, or the Roman interpretation, means grantor of dominion, G-O-D, grantor of dominion. So it becomes the grantor. So God became the grantor, and the Pope is administering everything on the earth, owns everything, the whole world and everything in it. He was known as, by the Cathars in the Albigensian Crusade, as Rex Mundi, the king of the world. And of course, they didn't recognize him as being the king of the world, so about 300 or 400 of them preferred to be burnt at the stake rather than go along with him being the king of the world, because they were working, if you like, the Christian spiritual program that didn't tie in with the Pope running his thing, declaring he was their king of the world. They then perfected this trust system into other trusts as well, Sesta KV trust as well. People go on about that there's this trust when your birth is registered, a trust is created. Well, of course it is, and they're trying to get access to this trust because it's worth millions of pounds, But of course they forget the origins of that, which is what I said before. In Roman law, a master is always responsible for his slaves. And what the master has done, as he owns you, is he's set this trust up to cover any liabilities that you may cause him. That's what the trust is there for. It's not your property. They administrate it, and you can access it because all your benefits, for example, you sign on, the money comes from that trust, and the Department of Work and Pensions get paid an administration fee for it, to administer it. That's how it comes, because there is no real money, as you know. It's a fiat currency now. So that's the way they kind of flip that. But it's unum sanctum is the original claim that is made against you. So your birth is registered. They've got implied right of consent. You live in an address. Your birth date is there. So even if you sit in a car that's got registration plates on it, they are able to perfect that claim. They'll say, well, look, there's registration plates on the car. It's owned by the DVLA. You've taken the registration plates off and you put Freeman on it, say. So then the guys will say, okay, well, what's your name? And you won't want to give the name. Well, all they'll do is they'll say, well, we have implied right of consent. We can beat you into submission, which is what they do now with the corporate laws. They didn't used to do it that much in this country because there was still an aspect of what's called the constabulary, because a policy man and a constable are entirely different things, just like law and legal. A constable enforces law of the land. He's there. He's your guy that's supposed to help you in the community. That's why a lot of people become police officers, because they care about the community. I mean, I know a few policemen and they're really decent, down-to-earth, honest guys. Unfortunately, a lot of them are leaving the force now because they can see what's happening and they're taking early retirement, and it's kind of going against the reasons that they joined up in the first place, which is a shame. And this is what's happening generally, is the old systems, or the old system where you had a sovereign nation and you had a monarch, believe it or not, you had much more rights in those kind of systems, because they had a duty of care and they were offering a service. And under Roman law, when you throw yourself at the mercy of the church, they will have to look after your body, your mind, and your soul. In fact, they own your body, mind, and soul. We're living, I think I listened to you do an interview with Mark Passio.
Yep.
And he said, I really like that guy. So there's loads of guys I should be mentioning, but he said, we're living in a prison. I'd say, maybe, we're living in an asylum. And what happened a couple of thousand years ago now, probably a little longer than that, is the really criminally insane, the psychopaths, actually took over the asylum and they killed, and will carry on killing, all the guys that are trying to help us get well.
Yeah.
And they took over, and it's their form of law. And they run a death cult, which is why everything is corpus, corporation, the talking dead. You're presumed to be dead. When you go into a courtroom, the first thing that happens is you're summoned to appear. Well, that's an occult term. They're summoning the dead to appear. And when it says all rise, that means you all rise from the dead, and then be seated means you sit down and you stay quiet. And just by following those laws, that means, or following those orders, that means you've given consent, and what the judge says goes. That's basically it. And ultimately, that's what all law is. So when the guy in the car who sat in there is trying to use all this stuff that he's learned, law basically is what the judge says it is. That's it.
It certainly backs up that we're presided over by a dark occult priest class, steeped in ritualistic, occultic activity.
Massively, absolutely. In all, you see, this is, it's black magic is where you try to manipulate things, and it's unnatural to conform to your will. You know, white magic is where you're trying to complement nature. I mean, only mankind is sensitive enough to be able and to know how to fix a bird's broken wing, or be the fine tuning in nature to make everything really run brilliantly. But of course, all that's been flipped over, and our consciousness has been manipulated through centuries and centuries of trauma. And what's happened now, I don't know whether do you know a sign called the Viscous Pisces?
Nope, don't know that one either.
Okay, so we've got a pre-conscious, which is what some people call subconscious. And imagine that as a big circle. And then we've got reflective action of consciousness, which works on words, our thought. And you put those circles close together and you just get this little fish shape if they're just meeting. And that's our consciousness, is in between those two things where they meet. And most of us work on this reflective action of consciousness, and we're separated from our pre-consciousness, which is where we get all our intuition from. People who live by nature, natural things, they're connected to that pre-consciousness. We've been through trauma, and that's what through trauma and fear, we've developed this reflective action of consciousness. And we think we are what we think we are, but it's only that tiny little bit, and it's that little fishy shaped thing with those two forms of consciousness, illustrated by circles that overlap. That's where we're at. So we're not realizing any of those huge potentials at all. You know, and that's an act of magic against, I mean, for example, humanity. The word human is a subspecies from mankind that was created by the Roman cult so they could not be impeded by the laws that they'd given out about slavery. So they made the South Americans, when they went over to South America, they came out with this term human, and then they gave these humans rights. Well, you've got your natural born rights if you're a man. Why do you need someone else to give you those rights?
And you prefer to refer to ourselves as Homo sapiens? Sapiens,
yeah. Well, it's a Homo sapiens, sapiens, mankind, womb man with a womb. Or, you know, again, it's all this word magic, how stuff can be flipped and the interpretations of it, because that's how most of us operate with this reflective action of consciousness. However, our gut feelings and our intuition and of what's right and what's wrong, that's natural. That's what real law is. We know as children the difference between right and wrong.
Yeah, you inherently know that, definitely. It's instinctive.
And that's because we're connected to something. And that connection is lost or becomes very tenuous through an indoctrination process, which is called education.
Well, you have to be manipulated into a satanic mindset where you just think about yourself and you don't give a damn about your fellow humanity or how your behaviours affect anyone else. Absolutely. I don't believe that is our natural state. I don't believe we come in to this reality with that kind of mindset, but society has been structured to make us go down that path. Through the so-called education system, through media, through peer pressure and social conditions. You know, otherwise, if we were left to our own devices, we wouldn't be adopting these satanic ways of doing things, I feel.
Well, I'll put it down I come up with a very simple way, and I think it's a way, if you really connect, you can teach yourself to do all sorts of stuff, because this is where really intelligence come from. The Druids, and this is going back a very long time, used to do things in threes, and threes are kind of like magic numbers, and they would look at the world. There are only three expressions of cellular life, and of course cellular life in this plane is everything. You know, the cellulites make up all the difference and diversity of the life we have. And there's only three ways in which cellular life can express itself. The first is natural. And a cell, you clap your hands, I clap my hands, and the cells have just died, but they'll replace themselves as they're supposed to be because they're connected. And they've got life force running through them. And nature gives the best, is the best still going. It'll give the maximum amount of difference and diversity for the most amount of time, and it's in harmony. And that's nature. The second expression of cellular life is benign. And benign means it's kind of detached from the natural thing, and it's confused. It doesn't know what to do. So benign cells are kind of like those moles you get, or warts, or something like that, to look at it in that kind of sense. It's confused. It doesn't mean to say it's good or bad, but most of humanity is benign. And then the third expression is what I call malignant. And that's where the dark magic comes from.
That's psychopaths, right?
Right. Well, I call it malignant parasitism. They are malignant parasites, and that's the way they work. And this plane of existence is got cancer, and it's using humanity, the benign members to create this, and it feeds on the benign. These malignant parasites, they feed on the benign, and they feed on the natural, and they consume. This is the whole thing about the Roman Empire and the dark magic. It's all about consumption. It's all about consuming. They and that word describes it perfectly, and that's how this malignant parasitism works. It consumes. It will consume this whole planet. It will consume you and it works on all levels. You can take that pathology up as a natural kind of psychology, or spiritual, a benign spiritual thing, or a malignant parasite spiritual thing, which would be the black magic. So you've got this massive humanity, which is benign, most of it. And you've got if you like, the good guys or the natural guys trying to say to the benign, come this way. This is where we need to be. This is where the answers are. This is where the solutions is. And you've got the malignant parasites are going, oh, no, get your job, get your money, get into debt, buy this.
Buy the latest smartphone, watch the X Factor, eat McDonald's. Consume.
And the thing is, the malignant parasites are being consumed in themselves, because the real tragedy about these malignant parasites is they will bring about their own death. As cancer will invade a whole body, it will actually kill itself when it kills the body.
Well, it's long seemed to me, and you made a reference to this earlier, that the elite ruling class actually understand the dynamics of the non-aggression principle of natural law, that you should not treat others in a way you don't wish to be treated yourself, do no harm, don't seek to take away the inherent rights of others. They know they shouldn't be doing it. I think they probably hate that this dynamic is in effect in creation. They absolutely hate it, but they recognise very begrudgingly that they're bound by it the same as everyone else. But they seek to cheat it in their twisted, diseased mindset by shifting that emphasis and that onus onto us and manipulating us into giving our consent. And they do seem to think, from what I can make out, that this will allow them to cheat the karmic consequences of what would otherwise come down on them. And I think when their judgment day comes and they answer for the behaviours that they've chosen in this life, they've got a big shock coming, because I think they've misinterpreted the way that whole dynamic works, and I think, there's some big time payback for them, as they're all going to discover one day. I don't know if you would agree with that statement.
Well, yeah, there's a lot there. Firstly, the laws of magic. If you look at magic, if you practice black magic, if you curse somebody, then that can come back on you tenfold. So you have to, that's kind of a magical tradition. So you have to kind of avoid that karmic thing. So as you quite rightly say, they need to trick you to consent to it. And that they believe will kind of deflect the karmic consequences of being manipulated. Because if you consent, you want it, you join the queue. And let's go back to some of these words. Basically, we've done registration, application, and submit. Okay. Application, 17th century meaning, means you are declaring yourself to be a beggar, and it's presumed you know what you're giving up in order to get what you're begging for. Submit means you bend to another's will. So if you register to submit an application for employment, in their term, you're voluntary, you're queuing up, you're saying, I'm giving up all my rights. Please help me. And they're turning around and saying, oh, okay, I'll help you. You can go and work down the mine. I'll do this. The fact they've created the whole system, that you've got no other choice, and they've manipulated you into doing it, is neither here nor there, but you've actually gone in it. So what's happened is you have to take responsibility for your action, because that's what you did with the best of the knowledge you had. And there's a consequence there. So you're inheriting that through your own ignorance or your lack of being able to sort that out. And that's where the change needs to be done, because you can't change the nature of malignant parasitism. You can't reason with it, but you can help those that are natural and those benign to more fully understand the consequences of their actions and what they're going to have to face. Because ultimately, the judgment day comes, I mean, I'm only speaking from personal experience here, is when you meet your death is you. And it's been with you every nanosecond of your life. And it's utterly without prejudice. Right. You try and bullshit it, and you just ascend. You just go down into the lower realms. Right. Until you kind of go, I remember, I know what it was about. No, it was about love. It was about passion. Then you kind of get sucked back up the escalator again, and you start vibrating at a higher thing. And if that's where you want to be, that's fine. But it depends what you want to learn. So
you judge yourself. Would that be a fair statement? Because it's my understanding that in spirit soul form, your higher self kind of judges, the life that you've just had. It's not some tyrannical god ordering you to get into a body and incarnate. You choose this for yourself in a higher state of consciousness.
Oh no, nature's much better than that. I said about the pre-consciousness and your reflective action of consciousness, and your life is where this little bit where they overlap. Well, when you lose your reflective action of consciousness, that ego self, you still have part of that with you, but then you connect with that massive thing that's been with you every nanosecond of your life, and it is without prejudice, because the pre-consciousness doesn't know about no or negatives. It's a positive thing that vibrates with nature, and it is unconditional love. And you have to kind of, your reflective action of consciousness, your ego is going to try and deal with that. And it's just so powerful. It's like being in the center of the sun. You wouldn't even dare when you're in that space. You're just not even going to dare. You just go, oh, it's a fair cop. I fucked off. Completely sorry. I shouldn't have used that word. I messed my life up. It's a fair cop. I'll accept the consequences. Yeah. And then when you've done that, you've then found the spiritual principles of humility, of honesty, and then you can reconnect and merge with that unconditional love aspect. And then as you've kind of, given yourself over to that, you've got the option to then, come back if you want and learn what you're supposed to be here to learn, which is unconditional love. Love to me animates the fabric of the universe. It's only 4 letters, but it animates the fabric of the universe, everything. That's what's behind it all.
Because I just wonder what that experience is going to be like for the Tony Blairs and the Henry Kissingers and the Prince Philips and the George H.W. Bushes of this world when they come to reflect on the life they've just lived. And, are they going to have the opportunity to evolve spiritually based on what they've chosen to do in this life? Or we can only muse and reflect on that. But I do wonder what that experience is going to be like for people like that.
Well, I think, again, if you side with the love aspect, then I know it's impossible for most people, and as it is for me, so I'm not saying myself to be any paragon of virtue at all, But these people, they need to be loved, and they will be connected with love, and they will have their own free will and choice, and they will sentence themselves. As they've given out, they will give to themselves. It will come back to them because they gave out, because it is all an illusion. If you take the natural cultures, we're living in the creator's dream. Although everything looks very real, the thing that is real is what animates the fabric of the universe, which is love, and your consciousness is real. I'm not interested in anything else, how much money someone's got, the color of their skin, anything like that. I'm only interested in one thing, and that's the quality of their consciousness. And are they capable of giving love and being loved, and are they capable of empathy? Those are the only things that really matter in life, and the things that come from those things. If you don't have those, then you are kind of without. If you're a psychopath, you have no empathy, and therefore you can't love. So there's this compensating factor. And for somebody like me, who's trying my best to love, I kind of feel sorry and pity and look down at people like that who can't do that, because in their system, a psychopath, everything is an object. For example, people in this country, they say, oh, I'm a subject. And well, that means they've been subjugated. So they're just an object, they're a thing. Another one, some people, I went to this thing the other day and saying, oh, I want to be an adult. I said, I don't want to be an adult. And they said, why not? I said, because it's an abbreviation of the word adulterated. Why do you want to be adulterated? Look at this word magic, grow up, you've got to be an adult. And what it means is just hang on, waste your time and be adulterated. Well, that's not a healthy goal to aim for, is it?
What chance do we stand with all this word magic around us? It's almost as if until we can chuck out this language and learn to speak in a different way, we're going to be enslaved by the very words that we used.
Well, we have to speak with our hearts. That's the main thing, because although our language uses words and these guys have literal definitions of them, every time we speak, there's a music and there's a meter in the way we speak. And if we speak from our hearts, for example, I listen to music, and you don't listen to music through your ears, really. You should listen to it in your guts. It should resonate in your guts, whatever music it is.
You marinate in it.
Yeah, you just go, yep, that's it. I listen to Django Reinhardt, Jimi Hendrix, Lucy Vandale playing Bach, and I go, yep, that's it. That's and I tend to now. Although I did. Like you, I go back to Paul Oakenfold and all that stuff, which just probably aids me. But I'm an organic musician, and I go back to the days where we had a metronome and you record a click track, and then you do a rhythm track, and then you play the drums over it, and that's the way I'd make music. And you get into a meditative state of mind, i.e., in the groove. You turn off that reflective action of consciousness, and you're being the instrument, and you're playing it, and that's what the groove is. And then I got into the dance thing, because the dance thing is a completely different thing. And I had loads of mates who were going, "You traitor, Alan! You've given up the music thing, and this is all computer music. It's and you're taking the digital nutmeg, the MDMA." And I'm going, "No, you're missing the point, guys. It's." So I got into that for a while, but I like both things. I like being receptive, if you like, the passive dancing thing. I really, really like that. But I also like performing as a musician, and I love playing drums the most. To play drums and see people dancing is I prefer doing that actually than dancing myself. There's a certain tribal basic thing there.
Yeah, it's a primal thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and that is where we should be, and that's why we need to be organically as beings, as sentient beings, as consciousness. Because what happens with music, we're connecting on that level. We're connecting on a higher level, really, and we're moving away from this jurisdiction, this tricksy thing of words that they have in courts. And we're on a higher level there. All right, so some people say, oh, it's drug induced and all the other stuff, but well, maybe it has to be these days, because we're so far in the other direction with all this consumption stuff. We need that kind of our minds blasted to that extent just to get back to where we should have been. I don't know. I mean, that's kind of part of my history, but I do love music as long as it's played with the heart and with integrity, and that's it, really.
Well, yeah. And 10 years ago, I was playing records for a living, and now here I am having conversations like this. Who would have thought? Life is a very strange thing.
Right. Well, I think that again, it's the word world. The world we live in is derived from the word weird. Weird and world were the same thing. It was just depended where your consciousness was. So when you were talking about the world, you're actually talking about the weird, because life is weird. It's very weird.
Well, yeah, just a bit.
Massively, I mean, this whole stuff. I mean, the stuff that John Harris was talking about. Another was Michael Tsorian. I don't know whether you had him on your show.
No, I know of him. I've not had him on as a guest.
He's quite interesting, and a lot of the research that he's done, and Jordan Maxwell. There are loads of guys, but for me, it all comes together with this law thing and the legal thing, because that's the magic that's holding it together. And people say to me, "Oh, I want proof. How can you prove this?" And I look at them as if they're being a bit imbecilic, really, because firstly, if you look at the amount of money and power that's generated by law, there's so many vested interests. They're not going to tell you. That's the first thing. The second one is no magician is going to tell you how his tricks works, especially as if he's earning a living playing the tricks on you. So for those two reasons, they're never going to share with you the meanings of law.
But isn't it the case that they put little clues and hints and little symbolic renderings of what it is they're up to everywhere, and they do it in very cryptic form, so that 99% of people seeing it stand no chance of understanding what's being communicated, but nevertheless there's the opportunity to know what it means if you want to put the work in to study it and come to understand it. Do you not feel they feel bound by this revelation of the method tenet, where they have to tell you what they're doing, but they do it very sneakily, knowing that you're not really going to come to that understanding, and that's another way of them getting themselves off the karmic hook as they see it?
Well, what they're actually doing is they're telling the truth, and because what they're telling is that pre-consciousness in you, because your pre-consciousness knows what's true and knows what's false. So they have to tell the truth. Otherwise, if they try and lie, then your pre-consciousness will kick in and go, no, that's not true. They're lying.
Okay.
So if they're hoping that you're so indoctrinated and you're so now in that reflective action of consciousness with the words and the thoughts that you're disconnected. And that's why you miss what they're saying most of the time, because you're disconnected from that faculty that would be able to perceive the truth. And your ego maybe wants to be taken in. It's maybe got a vested interest to take in. I mean, when you start talking about law and this stuff, I've had people go, no, don't tell me. I don't want to know, because it's going to upset their whole thing. That's how indoctrinated they've become.
Well, you get the same thing when you try and tell people about Jim Morrison and Frank Zappa and the Beatles. They don't want to hear it.
Oh, my God, yeah. Well, because it's part of something they cherish, which is their past. And the last time they had any kind of semblance of freedom and all the rest of it. I mean, the whole, as we know in the music business, it's used as dark magic. And that's how you socially engineer. I mean, Edward Bernay is the one at the turn of the century that was socially engineering. He was manufacturing consent by creating wants to fulfill needs. So you get these department stores so people can start wanting stuff they never knew existed, and so they start consenting to it, manufacturing consent.
Yeah. He had a book called The Engineering of Consent. He made a social science of it.
That's it. And he made a fortune because all the corporations, which is part of the death cult, because a corporation is the corpse talking, and then we go back to the Roman law thing, that in unum sanctum, and going back even further, what Michael Tsorian would say, atonists, I would say malignant parasites, but we've all got our own take on it, I guess. They're basically manipulating in a way, and looking for new ways to manipulate. But in their system, which is their claim, which they're continually perfecting. They've made a claim against everything, and they're trying to perfect that claim. And the way they perfect that claim is by consent. So their claim basically is they own your mind, your body, and your soul. And therefore, if you don't have a soul, well, then you can't be a full intact man. So you then be relegated to being a human. So they then give you some rights, human rights. You then are voluntary, registered the birth and all the other stuff. You've declared yourself to be, in their system, a mental health outpatient that was abandoned by their mother, that was registered to vote to get some other person who's not free to represent you, and you give them power of attorney over you, and you're illiterate, which is why they insist you sign in an X. So they perfected their claim. They say you're mental, you were abandoned, you can't think for yourself, you've given them power of attorney, and that you're illiterate. Well, you've perfected their claim every time you go to the ballot box. And so when 2 million say, I don't want to go to war with Iraq, they say, well, why should I listen to a boat of nutters? All those people have declared themselves, and I've got implied right of consent. And if I take 100 of them and I say, what's your name? Give me your name and address. Then I've perfected my claim. Did you vote? Yes. Did you sign with an X? Yes. Right. Perfected my claim. And that's the way they look at it.
All this stuff only works on paper within the fiction that they've created, right? Rather than, you could spend a lifetime being enslaved by this so-called legal system and having to adhere to all these statutes and man-made laws and stuff, but your spirit soul, your higher self, remains free and sovereign throughout, right? Because this is an illusory, temporary state of existence, and we transcend beyond this. So, a lifetime of enslavement, but ultimately you are within your very self still free. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, but I would kind of look at it another way. The dark sources, you see, basically as living, conscious, sentient beings, we are reality creators and projectors. And the dark sorcerers are getting us, by locking us down, to create the reality they want for them, to make it real. So the more people that are benignly creating this reality and going along with it, the more that reality manifests. And that's what they're doing. That's the ultimate magic that they're doing, is they're getting us to create the reality they want for themselves, which is very dark, and it's about consumption. Because we've lost our will or our connection. They've disconnected us, because the most simple things, again, here's a secret of life, and it's a secret of life because it's out there in the open. If you want to achieve anything, you first need to be able to conceive of it. You start something, you stick with it, and you stick with it no matter what until it's finished. Well, you need to do those to do anything. You have to do that. Most people can't do that. They fail to do that. They can't find the passion in their heart to want to start something. They can't find the passion in their heart to stick with it long enough. And it's really hard work. And then they want to finish it. It's a really difficult thing to do. That takes those faculties that make up mankind. So if somebody comes along and says, well, look, here, this paper, which is the ultimate addictive substance of power, is the ultimate addictive substance. Here, just throw some of that at it, and that will make it manifest. You put some money out there, you'll attract the solution. That's the dark magic of money. That's how it works. If you're like George Soros, you just buy the protesters, you buy the hope not hate, you buy all that stuff and shut down free talking and all the other stuff. You just buy it. Loads of people come out of the woodwork, and they will get paid to do it.
Well, what you were saying about the average person not being able to see a job through and just getting bored with it or whatever, that doesn't seem to have been a problem for the instigators of the New World Order. They plan their moves decades or centuries in advance, and they stick to the plan, and they display incredible levels of patience, and they are prepared to just sit there and for however long it takes for their plans to come to fruition. They certainly seem to have mastered that tactic from what we see.
Yeah, they know that. They know that secret, but it's not a job or not a job. which is a form of sort of torture. If you remember the biblical thing, it was, but
more word magic.
Yeah, there's loads of it. To do something is to do something from your heart that you want to create as an individual. So nobody's told you to do it, and nobody's paying you to do it. You're not conforming to it. It's something you're bringing out of yourself. Like, you want to learn to play the guitar, so you teach yourself to play the guitar. You go out and you do it. You stick with it. You start with it. You stick with it, and you get some stuff together, and that takes you on a journey, and you'll have experience. And when you do that, you're treading the path with heart. Whereas if somebody says, here's some money, this is your job, this is your career, and maybe you enjoy that, but you're just going along with it, because you're getting the money and that buys the house and and that keeps that consumption thing together. There are very few people out there, sadly, that are living their lives by animating themselves with something that they want to do with their heart. That they're really passionate about it, and they don't care whether they get paid for it or not. I mean, most musicians, you see them turn up in a car with thousands of pounds worth of equipment. They'll be doing a gig, and they'll be lucky if they get 20 quid out of it.
Oh, I know that one, yeah.
Exactly. Well, you know that because you're doing something with your heart. Your heart's in it, and that's how one should live one's life, is to tread the path with heart. And you'll find those people are much more animated in what they're doing. Because to me, my goal is very simple. I ultimately want to die with a smile on my face. And the only way that's going to happen is if I've lived my life being true to myself. And being true to myself means treading the path with heart. It's difficult, it's hard, but that's what you have to do, and that's the natural state of mankind, is to live life with the heart. Not exploit it or consume or anything. And that's how I believe we should be, and connect on those emotional level. We're incredibly sensitive beings, really unbelievable. I mean, when you look at children and all the other stuff, and we just kind of get dumbed down and disconnected from all that, and then we're just doing our jobs, and then we're just following orders, and then they were just going through some sort of polite thing. I mean, evil is like, two guards, one putting one in the back of the head of someone, kicking him into a pit, and talking to his mate, going, "How's my wife? She all right? How's the back?" With actually totally disconnected, from what they've actually done and what they're actually doing, and that is ignorance, and that is evil. And when people as individuals are so disconnected from themselves, they become psychopaths. They become like psychopaths. They don't have any empathy.
Well, it makes me wonder how individuals can go to work in a slaughterhouse or an abattoir, and they spend all day torturing and murdering sentient creatures, and then presumably go home at night, have some dinner, watch a bit of telly, and go to bed and sleep just fine, and go back the next morning and do it all over again. That's a personal sort of hobby horse of mine, but it just makes me wonder how anyone is capable of doing that. How dissociated you have to be from your consciousness, your humanity, your connectedness to everything in creation and nature to be comfortable with doing something like that. How mind controlled you have to be.
Well, I don't wonder. I'm amazed personally that people can do that. But I also know that where I come from as a child, I didn't know any better. My parents were carnivores, and that's what I had, and I grew up and I loved. I didn't question it. I didn't really know.
Well, me too.
Exactly. We do. So people kind of grow and they develop, and I'm sure there must be some guys that go in there. One morning they go in there and they go, "I can't do this anymore."
Well, I'd hope so.
Yeah, I'm sure they do. And
quit their job.
Yeah, and like where we reached a term in our life and went, I don't feel comfortable eating meat anymore. I just don't. I can't be doing that anymore. I can't. It upsets me too much. It's just. And other people. You see, this is the other thing is, and this is where the love thing comes in. It's if you can bring the love in the world, there's some compassion there. And it's saying, maybe be patient that those that will go in there will kind of evolve, and they'll just go like we did. I can't do that anymore, and give their job up. And I think. That's really happening. I think there's a lot of people in the world now are making those decisions, and I think the demand for meat, and that's certainly that sort of industrial sacrifice and killing and suffering and torture that goes for the sake of profit, this illusory thing, and consumption. It's consumption. It's just consumption.
And it's so temporary as well. You know, what strikes me about you're taking the life of a sentient creature that feels pain, feels emotion, feels a connectedness to its young, the same way that humans do. I know I'm going off at a bit of a tangent here, but it seems a good opportunity to do it. And then, you know, that the flesh of that animal becomes some meat that gets sold in the supermarket. Somebody eats that meat, and the next day they've shut it out, to be graphic, and it goes into the sewer, and that's it. That's the end of that animal's life. Meanwhile, some corporation has made a profit from it, and that's all that creature's life came to. As I say, bit of a rant, but it's just seems so unnatural. It just seems so temporary. It just seems so avoidable.
Well, maybe there's a system at work here that the people you were talking about earlier, the Kissingers and the Soroses and everything, maybe their fate would be to incarnate as that creature.
Well, I've often wondered about that, yeah.
It's a weird world.
I draw a bit of comfort from imagining that.
That's not weird. Well, I'm like that. I do the same, and I have to say to myself, I'm not that well. Because I do, because I hand on the heart, I wish I didn't, but I still do. But
I'm just being honest here, brother.
Well, that's it. So am I. I'm a work in progress, and I wish I didn't.
Exactly.
It's a dark form of humour, and I've been on this plane long enough, and I've become contaminated, I guess, and I've acquired survival skills really in order to deal with things, and a dark sense of humour is one of them.
Oh, you've got to have a dark sense of humour, man. It's the only way to navigate this madness.
Absolutely. And I've been into some situations where someone's cracked a funny when we've all been really utterly desperate and we've just got through. You know, it makes all the difference. I don't know where it comes from, but it is that. And I tend to look at the world like that. And I try not to be judgmental. I know enough about law. Another thing I did with John Harris, because we became good friends after he's passed on now. What we did is we put ourselves in the judge's situation. We thought, can you imagine going to work every morning and you just sit there? Can you imagine the stuff you have to listen to over and over, day in, day out? And it's quite an interesting situation to put yourself in, really, when you look at, in inverted commas, humanity, or a police officer, or, you know, you after a while you get into what's going on. You know, you
But somebody like a judge or a senior police officer, not a rank and file foot soldier, but, you know, the ones at the top, they must know that they're in the business of deception. They must understand legalese and maritime law, and they realise that what they're actually doing when they turn up to work every day is deceiving large numbers of people. Again, you know, the question becomes, how can anyone be comfortable with doing that, with knowing that's what they're a part of?
Okay, well, there is an answer to that, sort of knowing people like that, and I think we have to go to the Masonic thing. The Freemason thing kind of got really corrupted, you know, a long time ago, and it works by drawing in really decent, down-to-earth, honest men and women with integrity, and that's the core. They're the blue degrees, and they're kind of told half truths, but the core of it is very dark, and they never work their way up. So these people, they're in a situation where they think, well, I'm this high-ranking police officer. I know all around me these guys are messed up, but if I leave, there's going to be nowhere there to do that. So I tend to think you've got these black and white squares, which is base materialism, but you do have good guys in situations of power that are genuinely trying to do their best. You know, I know decent people that are in situations like that, and they struggle and they suffer for it. I mean, I spent quite a time working in rehabs, dealing with people suffering from the consequences of giving orders and dealing with that stuff, you know. So there are people that are in situations where they have power either foisted on them. I mean, there are some of the elite families, they're born into it, they go through all the horrendous stuff, and then they just say, actually, I don't want any part of this, and they're disowned from it.
Yeah.
You've got that. What's that name? Is it Ronald Bernard? I can't remember his name. Bernard Ronald or something like that. A Dutch guy. He was part of the elite. He wanted to make loads of money and all the other stuff, and he got invited to one of these sacrificial things, and something broke inside him, and that was it. He couldn't do it, and that flipped him. And now he's gone round to the complete other side. There has to be. Otherwise, things would be a lot worse than they are now. And I know they're sliding backwards, but there are honest, decent, honourable men and women in situations of power that are really, on the back foot, doing their best to hold hold what ground there is left, desperately, against all odds, really. And they're sadly becoming less and less because there's not much other than their passion and doing it for the heart that's making them hold the line,
You raised a good point there, because in the same way that our parents unwittingly give up our sovereign free status to the state through the birth certificate, they don't understand what they're doing, of course. They're not doing it with any malevolence. They just don't know how it works. But that's done because as children, we're not capable of making informed free will decisions for ourselves. So a grown-up has to do it for us. I was going to say adult, but grown-up seems more appropriate. But it also seems that there are special caveats which are observed within the elite's sick, twisted mindset when it comes to these family bloodlines and the roles that the offspring of these families are forced into. So, lifetime actors that are pushed into being musicians or Hollywood actors or TV stars or politicians, because they come from one of these bloodlines. And the same can be said of victims of mind control and satanic ritual abuse. These kids are not given an opportunity to make a free will decision for themselves. Their lives are mapped out for them by others, and they just have to kind of go along with it. It seems that they reserve this special caveat for their own kind, if you like, their own bloodline families, where that there's no free will. They just get pushed into these things. And as you said, every now and again, you get an extraordinary individual that seems to be able to break the mind control and regain some of their sovereign humanity. But for the most part, these lifetime actors do just that. They spend their entire life just going down the path that's been laid out for them. So,
well, exactly. I mean, I think for many of them, it's probably much harder than it would be for us regular guys,
exactly. That's what I'm getting at.
And I tried to look with as much compassion and the least amount of judgment possible, and to kind of be approachable. What we used to call in the shrinky game is to extend what's called unconditional positive regard to kind of everyone really. And give them the benefit of the doubt. And of course, people do take advantage of that, but sometimes they won't. So you've got to be a bit canny about it. So I tend to look, it must be much harder for someone born with that. It must be in the thick of it. It must be all around them to actually say, no, I don't want anything. I mean, that must take great courage really to do that. And at no small risk, I should imagine.
Well, I think of the Queen. I often watch the Queen in one of these pomp and grandeur ceremonies that she has to go through, and I just think, really, what choice did she ever have? I'm not a fan of the royals, I'm not a fan of the Queen or anything she represents, but if she'd wanted to break out of that institution and say, do you know what, I don't want to be a monarch, I'm not doing this, would she even have been able to do that? Or was it always her destiny to just have to knuckle down and go through it all?
Well, I would say yeah, and I think it's really good that you can see it in that way, because that's you're actually extending unconditional positive regard, and you're having compassion to someone you don't know that has been responsible for lots of stuff. I mean, lots of people go reptiles and all this other stuff, but I think it's much better and more evolved to be able to, with heart and compassion and empathy, and just sort of say, wow, imagine what that's like. Imagine to be born into that. Imagine the restrictiveness. On one side, you can have all that material stuff. I mean, being the richest woman in the world and all the other stuff. But then on another way, could you imagine looking out the window just thinking, wow, I wish I could just be like a normal person there and just be free to love who I wanted.
Yeah, you can't pop down the local Tesco for a loaf of bread when you feel like it. You just can't do that.
Well, apparently Prince Philip did. He used to have this he put a cap on and he had a London cab and he used to drive around London, according to Greg Hallett, who's one of the best muckrakers in the business, I think. But But I don't disbelieve a lot of what he says, because there is, it is a weird world and there are these weird things. And I should imagine that would be quite a priceless thing to want to do, is you're surrounded with all these rules, pomp, because you're seen. I mean, the whole thing, basically, you can't be seen to make a mistake. And just to put a flat cap on, get in a London cab, drive around, maybe give a few lifts to people. I mean, he was probably doing things that weren't particularly...
Yeah, he's probably going, cool, that Prince Philip, eh? What about him?
Yeah, but you could imagine having a crack and having a laugh with him. So if that's what he was doing, I don't know. But I'm we all have our limitations and stuff that we need to do in our lifetime. And we all need to be pushing the envelope, really. And we need to be pushing the envelope on the stuff that's difficult for us to do. Like as a musician, it's no use practicing what you know already. You've got to practice the difficult stuff. Otherwise, you don't progress. Otherwise, you're not pushing the envelope. And it's those sort of skills, basically. So I think no matter what situation you're born into, we all have the equal opportunity to do that. And even if we're born into the darkest, horrendous families, we can still do some good. I mean, there is, I believe, a little bit of good in the worst of us, and a little bit of bad in the best of us. Yeah. And it needs to be exercised. I mean, we all have. I exercise my dark side, because to deny it would just prolong an illness.
Well, yep. You have to be in touch with it.
Exactly. Yeah.
I've heard Mark Passio on some recent podcasts where he's just being totally brutally honest and just laying everything bare. And he said that, to be honest with you, I don't particularly like people. I don't like other people. Just being honest. And he said, I do the work that I do in service to truth and to creation. I don't do it for other people. I just do it because I have an obligation to be putting this work out. And I listened to that and I thought, if I'm totally brutally honest with myself, yeah, that chimes with me. I don't particularly like people either. And that's why I do this work. So you could argue that that's a bit of a dark side of somebody coming through, but we all have it. And we need to acknowledge that. Don't keep it hidden. Don't lie to yourself.
Yeah, well, honesty, open-mindedness and willingness, those are essential qualifications, really, to realize your potential as a consciousness that's animating the body that you're in, because self-delusion is really limiting, to believe in falsehoods. And that's why you're obliged to get to the truth. And the truth is the hardest thing. You don't make any money out of the truth.
Oh, no.
And nobody wants to know the truth.
That's right.
Nobody wants to know. Tell me lies, tell me sweet little lies. That's what everybody wants. Make up the most fantastic story you like. And that's completely tolerable. I mean, it doesn't matter. People will buy it. They'll want to buy it because they don't want to look at the truth.
I'm going to be putting this podcast out at the time of the World Cup. And there's going to be hundreds of millions of people watching the World Cup. And I do well to have 1,000 people listen to this. So there you go. That's the dynamic.
Well, as Winston Churchill once said, the truth is hidden by a bodyguard of lies. And that's one of the things he said. And he's a great orator. I mean, despicable man, personally. That's if you research about him. Yeah. But that's another subject. But he did come out with some amazing statements. And that is on. Nobody wants to know the truth. And it's surrounded by a bodyguard of lies.
That's right.
And that's the whole point, really. And if you want to seek the truth, then that takes real courage. And to do that, you're treading the path with heart. It's the only way you can endure, and people like Mark Passio, they're doing it. You have to be doing that with a sense of heart and a sense of passion. You can't, he's not doing it to make money out of it, I'm sure.
Absolutely. None of us are.
Exactly. And it's contributing, you're contributing to the greater good, hopefully, and to help other people on their journey as well. And that's how we should be as beings, as a consciousness.
Well, it actually costs you to do this kind of work, far from profiting from it. Financially, of course, there's other kinds of richness. Finance is not true richness, and that's why we do it. But this concept of consent that we've spoken about, it explains all kinds of things we see in society. The way it was first explained to me, actually, was somebody reached out to me a few years ago, and they said, sometimes you see a piece of wasteland and you might pass it every day on your way to work, and then one day you see there's a sign that's been placed there, and you go and read the sign, and it's a statement of intent to build some flats or some new offices or whatever on that land, and it's the developer's way of expressing their intent. And if nobody says you can't do this, they take that as, well, that's fine, then we can go right ahead and do it, which I thought was a good way of explaining it. Then you can think about things like CCTV cameras. When you get on a bus, if they're filming, there's always going to be a sign saying CCTV cameras in operation, so they're telling you. Recently, we've had this glut of emails. We've probably all had them in our inbox, these new EU data sharing laws, and all these companies have to say, oh, we're updating our lists, and please tick this box if you don't want to receive emails from us. So it's all consent, you having to agree to these things. You take out a mobile phone contract, you get 4 pages of small print that nobody ever reads, but it's just all their bullshit terms and conditions, and then when some government minister announces that we're going to war, they always have to tell you, even if it's been based on some false flag terror bullshit, but that they always express their intent to do it. And then I think another play out of this concept ties in with my work and what went into my first book, Musical Truth, which is predictive programming through popular culture, where you get aspects and depictions of what's planned put into music videos and films and TV shows and cartoons. And again, it goes back to when we as the masses don't voice any kind of objection and say we're not having this, they take that as us being okay with them going right ahead and doing it. 9/11 would be a good example. There's many predictive programming depictions of that. I don't know who you're supposed to write to. If you do spot something in a cartoon and say, hang on a minute, they're planning a terrorist attack, I'm not having this, who are you actually supposed to write to an email and say, dear sir, I object most strongly to your intention to bomb the World Trade Center towers? But nevertheless, that seems to be the dynamic that's at play here. So do you place much stock in this idea, predictive programming, and how that's just another example of consent being hijacked?
Well, predictive programming is part of social engineering. And social engineering is where on the people farm, if you like, or the estates on the plantation, they decide what the policy is going to be, of what they're going to plant, and how they're going to farm us, and what they're going to create, and how they want things to work on that people farm. And the technologies that they have now, they're really implementing that, because the problem they have is in their system, there's too many of us, and they need to get rid of us. That these people that go on about a bit overpopulation, there's something wrong with their mathematics. I mean, the 7 billion people living in the same population density of Paris takes up, just under half the size of Texas, and that leaves the rest of the world free. So whenever you hear these people, these social engineers going, oh, there's overpopulation, we need to do something about it, they never volunteer themselves, do they?
Absolutely.
Why? I mean, and you think if they volunteered, imagine if Kissinger, he's always on about it, and they're always very rich and say, okay, well, I've decided I'm going to volunteer, and I'm going to free all my assets, because if one of them dies, remember, they're the 1 to 3% that own 99% of the world. So if one of them dies, that frees up so much more for everybody else.
Well, that's right. And when politicians say we've got to go to war in Syria, it's never the sons of the politicians that go out on the front line. I've noticed that as well.
Oh, no. It's all part of the people farm, and how Rex Mundi, the king of the world, is running things, and his minions are helping him to do it. And it has to be done by total trauma, constant trauma, of course, and sacrifice, which is what war is. And it consumes, it's consumption, whether you're looking at that industrially or in terms of life and blood loss and all the other stuff. They're huge blood sacrifices to their gods Mammon. I mean, it doesn't have to be like that. I mean, these ancient gods, they say demand these blood sacrifices, and that's what they do. They don't know any better. Personally, I think it's a load of old bunk, but they won't try anything different because at the moment they're in control, or that's what they're addicted to. They're addicted to power. They're power junkies. They're junkies. They're addicts.
Yeah.
It's like, and that's how sick they are. And they will lie, they will cheat, they will steal, they will murder in order to get their fix.
And they seem to have no sense of humour either. We were talking about the need for a sarcastic, sardonic sense of humour, and these people, they just seem so machine-like sometimes. They just do the same old rituals over and over, and they obsessively cling on to their power, and they seem to have no humour about them, no light-heartedness at all.
I think what's happened is they genetically and over time they've kind of lost those faculties, which is why we're moving towards AI, artificial intelligence, because that's what they're becoming. They've always wanted us or everyone else to be like them, and that's as they progress. I mean, when they inherit the world and everything in it, and they depopulate us, do they really honestly think that they're not going to start squabbling amongst themselves, and that their own cancer is going to start consuming themselves because they're malignant parasites? That's their modus operandi,
right?
And they can't sort of see that, so they're just going to take things further and further down. And basically, justice is justification. When it's the system justifying its own power over you. That's the only justice there is. That's what you'll see mostly in a court. There will be exceptions. And they will make exceptions, but only to make it easier for them to believe in something that isn't true, that they're actually going to mostly get justice when they go into it. I mean, the term court comes from the Roman term courtio, which means to deal in bonds and sureties. So you go in there, you're a bond, you're a thing. And that's the way they look at the world. These people, it's about consumption. It's about consuming everything, and they're consuming everything in the same way that cancer does. It doesn't matter what the cells are, whether it's a rainforest, whether it's another species of animals, it doesn't matter as long as it's consumption. And when you look at these massive cities and you look at it and say, wow, is that a tumor? Is that a hot burning tumor there on this earth? Because it's not natural. And it's not the way it's meant to be. It's not the sort of way I'd like to live, but it's what there is, and you're born into it. So you take it as being, well, that's the way it should be.
And that's before we even get into the smart grid, Internet of Things, transhumanist future, which is a whole different show. But even before we go there,
well, 5G and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And all that stuff, because that'll put voices in your head. So that's real hardcore mind control, and it's weaponized as well. I mean, people really don't want to look at this stuff, and that's why it can get through. And again, it's the silence is consent. They're saying, less buffer wheels when you're on your internet connection, and you won't be able to have to drive your car anymore, and self-driving cars.
Yeah, great, wonderful.
But I know, but it's all control for them, and less control and freedom for you. It's
that's right.
I mean, for example, there's I've got some friends of mine that they're getting together a new political party, and they know the reality of things just like we do, and it's called the Integrity Party, and they're going to implement these policies, and they've got these wonderful policies like, well, let's look at the financial benefits of CCTV. How many crimes has it stopped? Let's look at, did it stop 9/11, the CCTV? Was it effective? Did it stop the 7/7 attacks? Did it, does it work? Because it costs a lot of money to keep all that together, that sort of society together, that smart society together. When you look at what it costs, it's the most ineffective investment ever. And it's not there.
Never switched on when they need to be.
Yeah, it's never. They say, CCTV is there for your safety and security. Well,
actually, no.
So let's see the evidence for that. There is no evidence for that. So if you just say, right, let's pull all the cameras out and sell all that lot secondhand to some country that wants it, that'll save us a fortune. But they don't want that because they're being tricked into this. They're being sold it. Consent's being, the Edward Byrne thing. They're manufacturing the consent I mean, again, we've got people with the mobile phones looking down. You see it, all the time. And we're using this sort of technology to speak now. It's got its benefits, but it's so powerful. It can draw people in. And they will give up so much for so little to so few.
Never has so much been given up by so many to so few. Yeah.
Well, we've gone back to Churchill again, because remember when there was the silent war, the quiet war, they called it. That's when all the bankers were making all the deals and the money lenders were doing the deals, and who has the money there. And at the end of some big dinner party in the city of London, after everything, all the contracts have been signed, some guy sat up there, I don't know, who will be, because the real people who run things, you don't know them, but Winston was probably sat in the back there, and being the great plagiarist he was, probably repeated it when the guy said, right, we've done all the deals now, all the money's there. Never has so much money been owed by so many to so few, i.e. us. And he thought, I'll take that. I'll be able to use that somewhere and plagiarise that. And now it's kind of used in another thing for the so-called Battle of Britain.
Yeah.
And again, if you forensically check the history, nobody mentions that over 20 peace deals offered before a shot was even fired against this country, or before any bombings. And they never mentioned that Churchill was already bombing German cities before even France was invaded and all that stuff. So,
and the BBC did a poll on the 100 greatest Britons the other year with Churchill at the top of it. And I think Jimmy Savile was in there somewhere as well.
Yeah, well, they should know, you see, because the guy during the war who impersonated Larry the Lamb, that character, who worked for the BBC, he impersonated Winston Churchill because by lunchtime or by the evening, Winston Churchill was so off his nut on alcohol, he couldn't speak. He was completely comatose. So this guy would have to impersonate Winston Churchill in order to speak. It's there. You can see the forensic evidence of it. And yet the same BBC is saying, oh, this guy's really good. I mean, if I was supposed to do work for the BBC and I never turned up and they had to get somebody to impersonate me, do you think they'd still keep me on as a job and hire me?
Yeah,
but they're not. So they've had to hire an impersonator in to impersonate the Prime Minister, who nobody voted for.
Wow.
He was foisted on Britain. Nobody voted for that guy.
Yeah.
In fact, ironically, the only democratically elected leader in World War II was Adolf Hitler. Ironically, that's the irony.
Says it all. Yeah.
So that's it's a weird word. It's very weird. But the truth is what people don't want to hear. People don't want to hear what we just talked about.
Oh, for sure.
They want to know that Winston Churchill, especially as that film is out now.
Yeah.
With
Gary
one
Oldman.
of my he's one of my favourite actors. He really is. I think he's brilliant. And I'm sure it's a really good film, but it's just
it's going to be a total whitewash and propaganda from start to finish. You know that.
Absolutely, but just as the music industry, the film industry is the same. It's manufacturing the social point of view that everybody can agree with, and they'll go, "Oh, Churchill was really good." They're not going to say, "Yeah, but what about the 3 million Indians that he starved to death when he nicked all their rice in 1943?" Yeah, what about the orders he gave for the black and tans to sort of go into Ireland and machine gun people watching a football match? They're not going to remember this stuff.
Yeah, that stuff's not taught in schools.
No, definitely. We'll never surrender.
Yeah.
And all that stuff,
Alan, what a great conversation we've had. Are there any points we've not covered that you particularly wanted to get in there, or any other things you wanted to state?
Volumes. Loads, really.
All right, well, I'd better say within 5 minutes then.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to mention, again, about some other people that have really helped me. Obviously, I've mentioned John Harris, and his this is a good primer for people who want to get into the law stuff and the consent thing. It's called It's an Illusion, and you can still get it on YouTube. There's also an interesting video called Councils, Courts and Con Men, which is shot secretly in a court, where you can see people not consenting to be the name, and what the problems that caused in court. And the constables came in, and the guy made them honour their oath, and they just stood down. They became constables, and they weren't enforcing the policies. And the clerk in the course is ordering the police to throw the people out, and they're not doing it because they're constables. And that's actually, filmed in a court. So there is a certain amount of power there when you get honourable police constables who stay true to what they're supposed to be doing and their oath of consent. I tried to remember other guys as well. You've mentioned Mark Passio. Michael Sorian is worth listening to. There's a few other guys that go quite deep into law.
Let me just pick up on what you were saying about those constables there, because we hear so often that the power lies with us, and you look at the numbers and it's ridiculous. 7 billion being controlled by a few thousand. But we can understand that the power lies with us, but it can be so difficult to come up with practical ways that we could take that power back without being caged or, beaten or killed. So are there any practical examples of the way people can withdraw their power from the control system without, suffering that kind of fate that we could talk about?
Well, I think the most effective way is to get up to speed with what's actually really going on, a bit of the word magic and that kind of thing, and not to consent or to contract is quite good, but we're tricked into that. But I think the best thing is to, what was it, the Special Air Service called, to be the grey man, to not stick out, to do what you can to sort of just blend in. A lot of people attract attention to themselves unnecessarily, and they kind of get people's backs up, really. And of course, the system works it allows certain political parties, for example, and they're basically what's called vessels for anger, because it needs to create conflict and to release anger and to keep the anger thing going. I mean, there's recent things happening with, what's his name, Tommy Robinson and all that kind of stuff. People really getting up about it and angry and all stuff, and it brings up issues. They need to keep things simmering and on the boil all the time. And it's best to be cool, really, with what you're doing, and try not to attract attention, especially if you're going to be potentially getting into confrontational situations. And always be polite and try and ask the questions. I mean, I could give some dialogues. If say, a corporate individual demands to know your name, answer a question, what makes you think I have such a thing? And if he says, well, everybody's got a name, say, well, that's your stuff. I need your name and I need your address. Well, you need to contract. I don't have to consent to give you that. And you're asking me to give you something that's not my property.
I choose not to enter into that contract with you.
You could say that, or you could flip it the other way, because there are many ways to do it. You could say, I'd be happy to accept your offer of service. My fee is £900 an hour.
Yeah, good one.
Because you're offering me a contract, so let's negotiate.
Well, this is what a lot of people have said that are objecting to energy companies trying to install smart meters on their property without their permission. And people have just been putting up signs saying, please be advised that if you set foot on my property, my fee is £1,000 a minute. And that's a way of diffusing that situation. Well,
firstly, you don't own any property. That's the bottom line. Remember, unum sanctum, everything's sound. Because your house is registered, even if you bought it yourself, with fiat currency, which isn't real money, okay, which is a whole other subject, but it's the land registry. It's like you own a train, but you don't own the tracks that it's on. So what control do you have over that? So if they come onto your property, well, the land you've got technically is you only have equity. You don't own property. So there's a difference there. And remember, ultimately, the law is what the judge says it is. But what you're dealing with is a dead entity, which is a corporation. It's got lots of money and it's got more power than you, but it is subject to certain limitations in that uniform commercial code, that form of law. So there are ways around it, but generally you only kind of get your way because you create what Douglas Adams used to call a more trouble than it's worth field around it. So in other words, if they want to install the meter, you make it really awkward for them when they go, it's more trouble than it's worth, I'll let it go. So
placing obstacles in the path of the control system as far as you can do so.
Exactly. And to do that, you need to be aware of how you're doing it and what strategy. I mean, there's a scam that's going now with local authorities, And whenever I think of local authority, I think of Nurse Ratchet. That's the physical manifestation I give them. Where they, on council properties especially, where they collect the money for Thames Water. And they say it's a water charge. But if you don't pay it, then it ceases to become a water charge. It becomes rent. So then they threaten to evict you for non-payment of rent. And the courts will go through and they will carry that out. So the thing called water has two names. It's either a water charge or it's rent whenever it suits them. Well, recently, and I was told this morning, there has been a judgment kind of against I think it was Waltham Forest. I don't know. I've got to check it out. But somebody's challenged that. And so rather than go along with it and say, I don't want to be evicted and pay the rent, and then it goes back to being a water charge again, they've actually challenged it in court and they've taken it up. And there's been a ruling that's brought all that practice into question because, of course, councils collecting a water charge means that they're technically selling the water. And if they're selling the water, they're responsible for the quality of that water. So there's a whole thing that I think has been opened up. I've got to do more research, but that gives you an idea of the process. So if you're challenging some corporation, you need to know the best way to do it. And there are many ways to do it. You might want to find a CEO's personally liable. That can be one thing. But you'd need to be prepared to be fairly tenacious and to know why you're doing it and that you're doing it with heart. You're sort of making that stand. See, because a lot of people, they got into the so-called freeman stuff because they thought, that would be a way of me not paying tax and all that, and they want to make money out of it. And they've kind of come unstuck. The best way to be doing this stuff is to do it from a kind of, if you like, a spiritual place, a place of good and just and honesty, that you are looking at the situation, you're saying that there's a disharmony here. I want to try and create a harmony out of this disharmony.
Well, that's some good advice that you gave. You should try and extricate yourself from the system in whatever ways you can without becoming a victim of it. And you should communicate information to others to help them to make informed choices. But other than that, this is something that a couple of other prominent researchers have said to me when we've spoken about the woeful state of the world and where it's all going. And they've said you can't fix all these problems. And there comes a point where you just have to withdraw your complicity in it and live as virtuous a life as you can and just be content with that. Just make good decisions for yourself, keep your head down, live the best life that you can while still trying to help others. And that's some good advice to live out the rest of your days, and I think that's all many of us can do, and it's not bad advice to follow.
Yeah, I completely go along with that. Be true to yourself, no matter how weird that means, but be true to yourself, and tread the path with heart first and foremost. And then there's some other space left in your life, which is where you can help others and you can do this sort of research and you can look at the problems in the world and say, well, no way can I put this right, but in maybe a tiny kind of way I can contribute a bit towards making a bit more harmony where that disharmony is really bad. I mean, if you imagine a full orchestra and everyone's out of tune with each other and it just sounds this horrendous cacophony, then two violin players get together and they get in tune with each other. And then maybe the third one in the row says, that sounds better because that's a little bit louder there. And he gets in tune. That's kind of the process, really, in the whole world, that we just kind of get in tune with that immediate environment around us, really. And then maybe the whole symphony of life will become more pleasing to the ears and the eyes and the rest of the senses than it currently is.
Great note to end on. I know that you like to be a sort of below the radar player to a large extent, and I do as well. But is there any of your work online that you'd like to direct people to, or is there any other projects you're involved with that people could take a look at, or do you really just prefer to be that anonymous guy?
Well, there is quite a lot of stuff online, but I do prefer to be kind of anonymous at the moment. The Alan of Salisbury stuff basically deals with the law stuff, and there are some DVDs there and are out that deal with a lot of the stuff that I did in the lecture. It's a DVD with visuals as well, which is a good primer. It kind of carries on from the work that John Harris was doing. And basically, I think primers are the best way. If people make a start, they'll know whether or not they want to continue, and if they want to continue, they'll find their own way. Alan, Alan of Salisbury at tutornota.com. If anyone wants to write me there, I check in that account every once in a while, and I can give them the details and send them some DVDs for a small donation, and I might actually put it online. I don't know whether it is online. I'll have to check that out. But it's a definite primer. But I certainly recommend people to check out John Harris's "It's an Illusion" as a good place to start. He's a lovely guy, and I miss him terribly. But he sort of started me on this journey as well.
All right, Alan, thanks for coming on today, brother.
It's been a pleasure, Mark. Thank you for inviting me. Have a great day.